This is update for June 30, 2023, day 492 of the war, end of the day update. This is also catch up for June 29. I'm going to focus more today on general strategic questions and developments as opposed to the front line. There is not really much going on. As I said before, it's all quiet on the Western Front. And it's basically strategic dead end for both sides, and it's very unclear how it's going to get resolved at this point. But I will provide update once we get there. First, let's quickly look what's going on in the U.S. Banking system. There's new data came out over this past 2 days. So first of all, the money supply it continues to slowly go down. As I said before, we have this huge mountain since March 2020. So it's declining. It's still there is a huge amount of money, but really just actually debt created. And so until it's gonna get somewhere closer to 18 trillion, there won't be sort of much felt in terms of economy. It's still going to be doing probably okay. So at least this metric is not going to be influencing as sort of as harsh as hard. And so from this perspective, M2 is not going to be not saying immediately or near term, or probably even medium term negative to general economy. Just because there's way too much of so-called money supply relative to the sort of economic activity. So it's not really constraining much. Now let's look what's going on in the banking system. So the situation with deposits is basically, in a way, kind of directionless. It's clearly not recovering, as you can see. Basically, it sort of stays somewhat stable. As I said before, the this situation is in remission, but it's definitely not in recovery or not in improvement situation. Then let's just look at another metric, which is interest rates on the bank borrowing from Federal Reserve. It's actually hit all-time high, which is definitely not a good sign. This is the only out of all of these metrics which shows that there is some stress that's sort of not visible on, if we look here, it's not terribly visible. And then also if we look here, it's also not visible. It's actually the same situation, kind of directionless, in remission, and there is not much sort of visibility of any kind of negative, immediate or even medium-term negative developments so far here. Now let's actually look at macroeconomic data for the week and what's going on in the different economies. I picked just some select numbers, then obviously not everything, but actually want to start with the US. And I put these GDPs here so you can kind of have idea of how important each economy is, relatively speaking. And obviously, US is the largest economy. And the most important data that came out of US was this core PCE. Basically, it's inflation, and core means that it excludes sort of noisy items. Such as energy and food and so on, because they are actually declining. So if you look at just PCE, it's actually went down more than basically the increase is smaller relative to core PCE. But this is the most important one because U.S. Federal Reserve or central bank is focused on this number. And as you can see here, it's kind of sticky. It's not moving much. And this is what I mentioned before. This is tied to productivity. In general, actually, what is what I'm actually I looked at actually at demographics in the West, and actually most of the world, and it's demographics is a very negative trend in terms of creating more inflation everywhere, because you have aging population, your labor pool shrinks, and so but then you have more people who need sort of support that don't produce, right? So this is all interconnected with productivity as well, and so on. So that is very strong force that probably will be pushing inflation on the higher side, and it's really long term situation. So it's not gonna get fixed in a year. It's actually, if anything, it's gonna get worse for the most of the Western world as populations sort of self-regulate to smaller number. And it's actually very misguided to see that most governments, they try to to control situation and trying to increase the population by encouraging actually immigration of people who don't have culturally not aligned, and then it creates really problems in the society. So and that's just if you really think that this is just why this is happening, there's huge economic reason why this immigration is happening, is because the system is built on the idea of this pensions everywhere, which was actually invented in Germany by Bismarck in the late 19th century. And the idea was that he wanted to offer something to unite Germans in one country. So it's some kind of benefit what they're gonna get, and that actually that system is to extent inherently unstable, because it's based on the idea that population is going to grow, and that time it sort of worked, and that's why he got away. In a way, he kind of did sort of fraud, except that fraud will be discovered probably like let's say 160 years later, or maybe 170 years later, since the time he did it. So it's almost a perfect crime. He did it, was cheerleaded at that time as a huge achievement, and and the results will be seen, I guess, by sort of our generations. And because it was such a, let's say, shrewd idea or popular idea, so most politicians around the world adopted it and implemented the same way. And so you have basically this pension system that where you need a large number of workers, people who work, not workers in literally like a factory, but someone who produces something, whatever they produce, and in order to support retirees, right? And if you have more retirees, you have fewer people, having births, children. You having a problem because your pool is shrinking. So you naturally trying to encourage, or the government's trying to, because they want to maintain the status quo, and then in terms of the system is working, because if the system stops working, there is a threat of social unrest and so on. So that primitive answer is, okay, well, let's just bring more labor from forever we can, and then because it's not very sought out idea, then people who come, they culturally very different, they not adjusted to that environment, and then it creates problems. And part of what we're seeing in France is a result of that it's just that strategy does not work. But long term, that's a big problem that will be pushing inflation higher in essentially everywhere. By the way, China in the same boat. They also in a bad demographic situation, not as bad as, let's say, South Korea is probably one of the worst one in the um, among their developed world. Ukraine is probably the worst uh, you can ever see. By the way, Russia is in bad shape as well. Japan. So it's just there's no bright spot in that respect. Basically, even US is in bad shape. Just not as bad as let's say Japan. Or South Korea, but certainly also declining demographically without any doubt. Um, and then once you have this demographic that's pushing for, inflation, and then you have all of this misguided, as I said, energy policy, all other policies that sort of stem from it, that basically increase the costs, and so you have inflation. That's you have like huge built-in inflationary push in the economies around the world, and that's where the problem essentially is at this point. So let's just sorry, let's just quickly look at the rest of the countries. So as you can see, in Germany, the consumer is definitely not feeling great. The confidence is negative, and it actually gets worse. Retail sales are negative, but they don't get there's sort of the I'd say the there is deceleration in decline of retail sales. So basically, they kind of like probably bottoming out. So things are sort of somewhat stabilized. I mean, they're still falling down, but somewhat stabilizing essentially. Then if we look at let's say South Korea, which is largest producer as well, manufacturer, probably obviously not China, but it's more value add products they making. As you can see, the exports are down. Also, things are bottoming out here, as you can see, right? Well, it's still going down. The negative number becomes less negative, which is sign of things are stabilizing overall. And the same is if you look at the industrial production, things are somewhere sort of pointing in the same direction. That things sort of the decline slows down, things starts to stabilize. And actually, in Japan, it's even there are sort of signs of their movement in other direction. As you can see, retail sales up, inflation is up, which obviously not a great thing, but in this context, um, you can kind of try to look at it in somewhat positive way. At the same time, as you can see, even in China, the manufacturing PMI, it's tiny bar. It's still in negative territory because it's below 50, but still not going. It stopped going down. Let's put it this way. The only thing is that basically non-manufacturing PMI is declined a little bit, but still it's in positive territory. And as I said before, profits actually declined. There is sort of acceleration in decline of profits, which kind of negative. That's only sort of like truly negative trend so far. Then if you look at the European inflation, it does look like it accelerated. And again, this is core, right? The same as US core here. So it actually looks a little bit like it's accelerated. Again, the same reasons I said before that's driving it. We'll see what happens there. And then if we look at the Italian industrial sales, basically it's sort of proxy for industrial manufacturing, except it's more leading because it's a sales. So as you can see, it went into negative territory. So you can see things are sort of negative, but they seem to be a little bit stabilizing. That basically there's no more acceleration in the negative trends, and it's more like slow down in a negative trends overall. As sort of like if I condense this to one sort of bottom line of all of this is things somewhat stabilizing, going down, and generally the trend basically we not bottoming out, but definitely there's no clear sign that like things are really accelerating in the wrong direction. They sort of bad, sort of what was the U.S. banking system is sort of, it's in negative territory, but it's sort of in sort of remission, or in things here in somewhat similar way in as a message. Also want to talk about a little bit about the China. China has passed two new laws, which is very interesting. One is espionage law, and I think the other is called some foreign nationals law, something along those lines. The point of the importance of those laws is that it does not define, actually, which is very ironic. It doesn't define espionage. It basically creates a very vague term. So basically, government has very ability to label anyone as doing spying or doing something negative, and the same with this law on foreign relationship, where essentially it's ensuring that foreigners are not undermining social order in China and so on. So again, the same idea, that what is undermining, to like, there's no clear metrics, and so this creates a lot of latitude for abuse from the Chinese government and Chinese governmental authorities. And so basically, this is kind of like they arbitrarily can apply. Okay, well, they whatever, like you or don't like you, they will apply it. If you do what they want, they will not apply it to you. So it's just not a situation where you can plan in a clear way. And this is especially this is more targeted towards foreign businesses in China. And this is probably one of the worst things that Chinese government authorities and Chinese president could do to push foreign businesses out of China. This is probably not going to happen in the short term, because all of these businesses are run by managers, basically hired CEOs, are basically hired people, hired manager, who does not care about the long term. All they care about the short term result. So as long as things don't blow up like straight in your face, they will continue sort of doing what they're doing. But as slowly but surely, I think there will be more and more cases of all sort of arrests, imprisonment of all sort of different levels of managers with different companies, and that will slowly but surely will change the tide. It's not going to be sort of quick overnight. There's a lot of inertia, and China still offer better opportunities relative to, let's say, West. You cannot do most of the manufacturing in Europe. You cannot do that in the US. So you have essentially don't have many choices. And as I said before, it will never be substitute for China in terms of manufacturing. There is some movement towards Vietnam, but as you can see, even territory-wise, people-wise, Vietnam is also no match to China, and also infrastructure-wise. So in some ways, global businesses, they have no options. There's nothing that can substitute easily China without increasing costs, and that's another problem of this deglobalization that's pushing inflation higher, as businesses do try to move out of China, but all of those moves lead to higher costs, and that's where there is a problem, basically. But as I said, this is more focused on China. I think that's the worst they could have done to themselves, because obviously most of the spying is really done by Chinese government. There are even Chinese army units that focus on this cyber warfare and so on. So that's what's really who is driving it. But it's so interesting that China is, creating these laws, which apparently they just want to sort of use them as a tool. They realize that there is not much of, or at least I would say, intellectual property there to steal. So it's more of the tool or leverage against the foreign businesses in China to basically create artificial sort of threats or sort of whatever criminal, probably criminal situation where you basically blackmailing, right, the businesses so that they do what Chinese government wants to do, and obviously it will lead to total abuse, and eventually it will push foreign businesses out of China. Now let's switch to Ukraine. I'm going to talk a little bit actually about Russia. First, about Russian economy. The most important indicator is exchange rate between Russian ruble and US dollar. And Russian ruble is accelerating its decline. It was at 89.5 versus US dollar. So as you can see, it's pretty quick decline. I think it was like probably a week ago, 10 days ago, or something like that. We were in like low 80s and we already essentially touching 90. So this basically reflects the situation in the Russian economy. That essentially this is accelerating decline. It doesn't mean that Russia will blow up tomorrow, and Russian people are willing to sacrifice. So this does not mean collapse. So that's not what I'm trying to say by any means. It's just all I'm trying to say is things are getting worse in Russia, but this is sort of not end of the world. Let's put this way for Russia by any means. That's all. That's what I'm trying to explain. And then also I want to give a little bit update on the Wagner Group and Wagner. I don't think I sort of discussed it much, but Wagner Group is basically a huge empire that intertwined with the government, the Russian government, and sort of basically a tool of the Russian government. At the same time, it's a tool for people to earn a lot of money who run this. And obviously, it had this military part, but it had also media part, and it was a quite pretty huge, very big media empire. So, for those who don't know, there is this troll factory in St. Petersburg that was actually run by Wagner Group and all of that internet research agency that was allegedly messing with the elections in the US. This was all done by actually Wagner Group. Well, it's not called Wagner Group, it's called Patriot Media, but that's all sort of one saying belongs. Well, doesn't even belong. I wouldn't say it belongs to Prigozhin, but he's definitely have some stake in it, and he's definitely direct manager of all of that. So going back to this, that whole empire was disbanded. Most overwhelming majority of people were fired without any sort of other opportunities. So we're probably going to see quite fewer trolls, all of the sort of psyop operations and so on, because essentially Russian government sort of lost very important tool that they had, which is obviously positive for Ukraine. But that's just one of their sort of fallouts from this attempt to seize power by Wagner Group in this case. There is another part where Prigozhin, he had the business where he was supplying, let's say, food, not food, but food rations for the Russian army. And now he was pushed out of that business, so it was very lucrative business for him. So that also he lost that business essentially as well. So what it's very clear is there will be total destruction of this whole Wagner empire. I don't know what's in sort of one umbrella name you can call it, but it's definitely totally destroyed, and it's sort of very unclear. I'm actually curious to see what's going to happen with the military part of it, but the rest of it, it seems like is completely annihilated at this point, and it would be interesting to see what personally Prigozhin is going to do, if he's just simply retire and disappear off the radar screen, or there will still be sort of second coming. I don't know. Um, really, there is for second coming to happen. He really there will be there is a need for success on the Ukrainian side, but as I said before, the where Ukrainian side stands in terms of organizational capabilities and so on, it's just not there, and the chances of that are very slim at this point. So it's interesting. I'll provide updates as sort of new information emerges of basically of what's going to happen out of it. But so far, it looks like purely if you look from Western and Ukrainian perspective, it's definitely clearly a win, and it's especially it's in some ways it's very huge strategic victory because some because this whole empire is essentially disassembled, destroyed, and basically turned into dust without really any effort from Ukraine or from the West. So basically, it's internal infighting in Russia, and this empire lost, and that was the most potent and the best tool Russia had at its disposal, and so that's strategically it's a huge victory. Doesn't mean that it really means that Ukraine and West will win, because Ukraine has its own problems that sort of handicap its Ukraine, but it's definitely a huge positive overall. Now let's walk through the front line. Let's see what's going on there. I'm gonna start. I'm gonna do it in a clockwise fashion, starting from very north. So the situation along the state border more or less quiet, especially relative to the beginning of the month. I'd say fairly quiet. And as a summary, I would say, as you can see, the offensive sort of started on June 4th, lasted for probably like less than 10 days, I don't know, 8 days, active days, and totally fizzled out. At this point, is just, I would say, as I said, it's all quiet on the Western Front, just tactical fighting, tactical attacks to improve tactical positions. But otherwise, there's no really movements, and it doesn't look like there is a clear vision on the Ukrainian side what to do. And as I said, on the Russian side, they basically like slowly melting ice cube in terms of number of troops, and that will lead them eventually to the situation of either repeating experience of this collapse of the front line that happened in September of 2022 near Izum and Balaklia, or they will need to do another wave of mobilization. So, and the Russian political top is totally doesn't want to do any kind of mobilization. So there's high chance that in probably 2-3 months there might be some sort of collapse of this front line somewhere here, not because Ukrainian command was doing great and was successful in its plans and execution, but just because Russian command is repeating its own mistakes and led the attrition to that level that just front line collapses on its own, because there's simply not enough troops per kilometer of the front line. Now let's move to the North Lugansk front line. Things here are quiet. Again, it's just strategically quiet place, and probably will remain such for remainder of this war. Then let's move to the North Donbass front line. Things here sort of call it warm, basically tactical Ukrainian attacks north and south of Bakhmut, and then Russian counterattacks in this similar area. But really, no real movement. It's not really strategic, large operations. As I said, just tactical fighting, low-level fighting here. But it's sort of more active than let's say up north. Let's move now to central Donbass front line. Things here are, as I said, broken record. The same, attacks from Russian, mostly Russian attacks from this Piski salient, Marinka, Avdiivka, without really any success. Now let's finish with Zaporizhya and Dnipro front line. Here is again essentially all small tactical attacks, probing attacks, but from Ukrainian side. But otherwise, it's quiet. And then here, Russian situation sort of similar, and sort of and here is a very interesting example of how both armies are the same, because the commanders are essentially the same. It's a Soviet sort of mentality, and what Russian commanders are doing is there is this Ukrainian bridgehead that I mentioned here, and essentially the only way to attack this bridgehead, you need to go straight on this road, because the sides of it are either too swampy or there are minefields there. So essentially, you just there's only this road, and it's obviously under Ukrainian artillery fire and so on. So Russian side command is sending sort of wave after wave of troops just to be completely annihilated with zero chances of success, but nobody cares. So again, this is similar to what happened with Ukrainian offensive, except was more sort of advertised, and obviously Leopard 2 as a picture looks better than Soviet equipment. But and before that, if you remember, it was like in May in actually Bilohorivka, where Russian also tried to cross the river and destroyed a huge number of equipment. So, and Vuhledar Russian attacks again with a lot of losses. So this is they in a way the what I'm trying to say is all of this commanders they never learn. They just stubbornly applying this suicidal attacks. They fail. That's no big deal, essentially. And so this is happening on the Ukrainian side, and obviously Russian. It happens on Russian much more. This is because Russian side is had more sort of opportunities to do offensive operations. Ukrainian side haven't had much, but they do. Basically, there's essentially no difference from operational perspective between the two armies. And as I said, they are both Soviet armies. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and till next time. Bye bye.